All right, betters. Today we talk about remote viewing, right? Pat Price, Skip Atwater, Project Stargate. Boom. I've got a brand new clip from the Shawn Ryan Show with Skip Atwater talking about Pat Price remote viewing 4 UFO bases that are currently on planet Earth. 4 different mountains across the globe. We're going to get into it. And I've also got a really cool clip from a Y-Files episode that I'm going to be showing that I highly recommend watching the entire episode. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, let's start with this first clip of Skip Atwater, more on him in a moment, on the Shawn Ryan Show, talking about these 4 UFO bases that Pat Price, a remote viewer who's no longer with us. It's quite interesting, y'all. Just pay attention. Roll the clip.
This Project 8200 thing was something that I did because Pat Price walked into SRI and his normal working there in the early 70s, having come up from originally down in Burbank. He then lived in Northern California. But he would come down to do sessions because Putoff and Targ checked him out. And so he would go in and he would do things, but they had to control him because he was a gregarious, wild cat. Is that a good? He was just uncontrollable in terms of what he would do. Mm-hmm. And he came in and on Putoff's desk, he said, "You might be interested in this. I've been interested in this for a while, and I've found 4 UFO bases around the globe. And so you really ought to look at it." And
4 UFO bases.
Yes.
And this just came in just completely random one day. This bag comes in, and here it is. 4
Right.
UFO bases around the world. Where were they? Or where are they?
Yes, they're still there. This all happened 50 years ago, a little bit more than that now. Mount Inyangani, which is a country in Africa, isolated country. Mount Hayes is up in Australia. Mount Perdido is on the border of Spain and France. And then there's one in Australia, which I can't quite remember the name of that up in Australia.
Hayes is in Alaska, correct?
Hayes is in Alaska, yes.
Okay.
Zeal, I think, might be the one down in Australia.
What? Okay, so we've got 4 UFO bases hidden underneath the ground, remote view by Pat Price, pardon me. Another Pat. Sounds good to me, right? This is quite interesting, right? I like it because it's kind of like something you can go check, right? Like, what's going on? All these different places, right? Alaska, Spain, Africa, Australia. Honestly, quite exciting. What is going on in these bases? And honestly, Pat Price, if you're not familiar with him, is quite an enigma of sorts, and there'll be more on him in just a moment. But what I find very interesting about this is his story, Pat Price's story, right? Because he was kind of like this rebellious remote viewer, right? Kind of, the Iggy Pop of remote viewing, right? Very rebellious, the Ozzy Osbourne, right? Of the rock and roll side of remote viewing, right? And as you'll see in this next clip I'm about to play, Pat Price is kind of going, as they might say, off the reservation, doing his own thing and finding these UFO bases, right? And here's how Putoff had to say about that.
Putoff had those on his desk and told Pat, "Don't ever do this again. Go get working. You're not to do things alone. You have to follow protocol. We're being paid by an outside agency, and we have to follow our protocol, else we'll get fired. So you need to not ever do this again. Only do the things that Targ is working with you in the interview room next door. You do what things we're telling you to do so that we're in control and we can tell the CIA what we're doing.
You know, that's a very interesting demand considering it's all done in your brain. That's that's telling you, I mean, essentially the same thing as telling you, don't think about these things. I'm your boss. I tell you what to think and how to think.
Right.
How did Pat respond to that?
Well, I don't think I know the answer to that question,
Okay.
but he shrugged his shoulders, and I'm sure because of the maverick that he was, he didn't much care about what he said.
Probably motivated him to do more.
Right. Who knows?
My kind of guy.
So anyway, Putoff keeps it in the drawer, and then he waits.
So I really like Shawn's, response there, right? Like his kind of guy, right? Just doing his own thing. I mean, being told don't use your mind outside of work, right? And how Putoff, saying, hey man, the CIA's paying us. We got to do this on the books, right? But what's the difference? Why can't he just do it again? Seems kind of odd, right? I guess he wants it cataloged. I don't know, controlled. I'm not sure, but I find that story quite interesting. Now, let's hear from Skip Atwater talking more about Project 8200 and what exactly that was and what exactly that meant.
So I worked up a set of plans for taking the transcript and creating the names of the mountains where these UFO bases were, underground UFO bases were, and then did a series of challenge targets. 4 of them with Joe, who does a ERV thing, he just lays down and talks. The other people trained by Ingo Swann, and they have this very complicated structure to do their remote viewing. And so I had 6 of those, I think maybe 5. And then we had a couple people who kind of did their own thing. And this was 10 years after. That's why I call it Project 8200, because it was 1973 when Pat Price did this. And then Putoff gave me the material here after, in his opinion, things quieted down out there and people weren't talking about this anymore. So he handed me these and see if I would run challenge targets on them. And so the Project 8200 is those challenge targets of asking Stargate remote viewers, giving them coordinates to go to and have them describe what's there.
Now, let's let Skip describe a little bit of what Pat Price saw at these UFO bases, because I don't know about you, that's what kind of interests me the most, right? You see these UFO bases underground, but how do you know they're UFO bases underground? And what does that even mean, right? They're alien bases underground. Like, what does that even mean, right? What is he seeing that makes him think that, right? Take a listen.
And so these bases, were they part of the challenge targets?
That I gave them the coordinates that Price had said, this is where I was looking. So I took those coordinates and I told them to go look at these different coordinates and see what they found there. The Stargate remote viewers.
So before we get into what they saw, what did Pat see at these bases?
He described them as inside areas where 4 different kinds of groups of people who had different duties had inside places, that they were inside these mountains.
What do you mean 4 different types of people? Races, genders? What are we talking here? Just different projects that they're on?
Yeah, these 4 bases had different stories. I can read them to you what they were. They had different jobs that they did in 4 different bases. And so he would talk about, well, I'm going to go over to Mount Inyangani now, and I'm going to look at Mount Hayes. And so this is another thing that we talked about before. He just would go to this place as, well, this is very interesting over here in Mount Perdido, but I think I'll go back up to Hayes. And then his thing would change. And we had to go through the transcript very carefully. Where's he supposed to be talking about now? And then going back to the discussion we had a minute ago, how did he know which one to go to and might be more interesting and so forth? And that's just in the back of my mind now, so to speak. Silly the way I talk one way one time and say, then in the back of my mind, which I know it's not in there. Anyway, so
now, there's not too many pictures of Pat Price available, to be honest with you, and not, interview footage, that kind of thing, like all this stuff, right? Because Pat Price's story is so complicated, and AJ from the Y-Files has done the best deep dive about Pat Price I've ever seen. So I'm going to show you a clip from an episode that I highly recommend checking out. I'll put a link in the description for this Y-Files episode. Again, highly recommend checking out that entire episode. It's phenomenal. Top 3 for me that Y-Files has ever done. And that's saying a lot because all their episodes are impeccable, right? They're just like masters of like how to cover this topic, to be honest with you. I have a lot to learn and very inspired by what AJ and the crew at the Y-Files does. But seeing some of these pictures like this where you can see from the 70s where, Hal Puthoff, you can see Pat Price here as well. And, this guy just didn't get what he deserved.
And I'm going to see what this is. This is marker 700. So indeed, Pat's grave is entirely unmarked. All right, I think he deserves better than that.
Pat was with the CIA for less than 4 months. A few years later, the CIA's remote viewing program was called Project Grill Flame. Same mission, different name. Eventually, it would be called Project Stargate. In 1980, the operations and training officer for the project was Skip Atwater. Skip was a retired Army intelligence officer now recruiting and training remote viewers. One day, Hal Puthoff shows up at Skip's door with 4 files from Pat Price's remote viewing sessions, each with a different location. Pat gave the documents to Hal before going to work for the CIA full-time. Hal told Skip, "You might want to look at these." Skip looked at the files and couldn't believe it. One location was a secret alien base under Mount Hayes, Alaska. And the 3 other locations? 3 other mountains. And 3 more alien bases.
All right, y'all, that's it for today's video. Please let me know what you think in the comments about Pat Price, remote viewing, these 4 UFO bases. What do you know? Give me some more information down in the comments. And again, please go check out that Y-Files episode. It's absolutely phenomenal. So we'll see you guys on tomorrow's video. Remember, every day's a gift, y'all. Peace.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep.